As requested, we did an evaluation and a feasibility study of New Mexico developing an enhanced legal assistance portal. And we took a lot of looks at different options, looked at best practices. We've done work for Pew Charitable Trusts and other folks along these lines. So we used that information as well. And we identified options and best practices that could guide this process should you decide to go in this direction. So what did we do? Well, we reviewed all the materials that we could find about New Mexico's legal system and residents' legal needs. There have been a number of studies done in the past. We took a look at those studies. We examined the functionalities and the use of New Mexico's current legal aid website. We took a long look at that. We interviewed a whole bunch of folks, 25 plus New Mexico stakeholders, lots of you in the room and on the conference right now, or folks that we talk. We tried to get as wide a variety as possible, folks that had been involved in various ways in different aspects of New Mexico legal assistance and providing legal information to people over the years. We got an excellent cooperation. People were open and talking to us, and we got a lot of great data and information. We identified the best practices for developing and operating legal assistance portals. And particularly, we looked at and had a presentation from Law Help MN.org site, which stakeholders had identified as an exemplar. What are the key findings? Well, New Mexico currently faces substantial access to justice barriers. It's a complicated state, as all of you know. I was lucky enough to do a lot of driving in New Mexico this summer. I went all the way from Tucumcari to Las Cruces and Santa Fe, and saw just how different different parts of the state were and what they were interested in. Many people lack knowledge about their legal rights and options, and they have limited access rather to self-help resources. It was pointed out there are some giant counties in New Mexico that don't have any lawyers at all. So, oops, there we go. We reviewed the material. We reviewed the materials on New Mexico legal aid systems and residents' legal needs. We examined the functionalities and I'm sorry?
You went backwards rather than forwards on the slide.
Yeah, there we go.
There you go.
The current New Mexico portal has substantial limitations. Money is the big limitation. Staff time is a big limitation. People have done substantial work, substantial volunteer work, and substantial volunteer hours, but it still has limitations, and it receives low visitations, about 2,000 a month. In contrast, a portal like Ohio's or Minnesota's gets 500,000, 1 million visits a year. So also New Mexico Legal Aid, the current website lacks capability to expand. Again, some of those staff limitations and some of the other limitations mean that the functionalities and content, make it difficult to expand. There is widespread support, as you know, among key stakeholders for establishing a legal assistance portal with significantly enhanced content and functionality, more functionality than the state's current website can provide. So, what were the key desired functions? What were the people that, when we asked people, what do you want the portal to do? What did they say? Well, first of all, they wanted people to be able to go to the website and use plain language queries. I'm thinking about getting divorced. My landlord's trying to kick me out, those sorts of things. They wanted the portal to focus on educating users about legal options and to empower them to seek court options as pro se litigants. We heard a number of times from a number of different people, including people who run help centers within the court, that it is a main goal that's because of the nature of New Mexico and so many folks not having access to direct legal help, that they would be able to use the portal and represent themselves effectively as pro se litigants. They wanted to provide a one-stop eligibility screening referral to folks like legal aid and other folks that link users to the state legal service providers, many of which, of course, have income limitations. We wanted you wanted the portal to provide information in formats that is accessible to New Mexico's diverse population. Again, there are places that I drove through this summer where you can imagine a lack of access to technology, a lack of access to Zoom technology, and so on. And finally, people said, "Look, it's not enough to what was the phrase? If just because you build it doesn't mean they're going to come." So a portal is going to have robust marketing. It's going to have deployment strategies. People are going to have to know about it, including community navigators, to help users find and navigate the portal. So there's a model where people access the portal themselves, and as well as a model where people come into community help centers in different places, including council houses, to get help going through the stuff they need to. Gary?
Yeah. So ideally, the stakeholders told us that ideally that the model that New Mexico really thought it wanted to move forward to would be a really replicating what Minnesota is doing. And we had Minnesota make a presentation to the group in the spring, and everyone was unanimous that, yeah, that is pretty much what we want. Earlier, we had done a full evaluation of the Minnesota portal. We agree that it is an exemplar. It gets about 500,000 sites visits a year, and our surveys of people who had used it and stakeholders in the state found that it was successful in improving access to justice. People who used the site said it made them more knowledgeable about their legal options, more prepared to initiate the legal actions that the information said that they could pursue. And the legal aid organizations also said that they believed it improved access to justice in a couple of ways. First, it made it easier for people to link to their organizations through that website's legal server application. They felt that people who came to them through the portal were much more educated about their options. That made it easier for legal aid to serve them. The screening process was easier. They saved time because people already understood what their options would be, and it helped them to serve more people. So we agree that using Minnesota as an exemplar to when designing the new portal really would, we believe, meet the key functionalities that New Mexico stakeholders indicated were important, because Minnesota does those functionalities and does them well. Next slide, please. So what we believe that it is feasible to develop a new portal. There's a lot of support in the state to doing that, but we feel that before New Mexico starts that process, it's going to be really important to set up a very deliberate process to plan for the development of that site, to guide how it's going to be designed, and to plan for its ongoing operation. And when we did our nationwide scan of portals, it became very clear to us that there were a handful of exemplar portals, and they were exemplars because they had gone through a very deliberate planning cycle, that they had established a strong set of goals for the portal that guided its development. They really thought about what software options were available and which ones would fit the state's needs. They developed a very strong governance structure, which kept all of the key stakeholders engaged in the process. And that also allowed them to continually touch base with the key stakeholders to identify where do we go from here? What policy areas do we want to build into the portal next? What new functionalities do we want to have? What new marketing opportunities should we develop? So developing that process, creating a clear software development plan that specifies all of these areas, functionalities, the content areas, the time frame for development, and thinking about resource requirements. It's critical to getting that down before development starts. Absolutely essential. Next slide, please. That includes several steps. One is determining what organization is going to house this and assigning them responsibility for doing that, with everybody understanding that this is how it's going to be operating. Establishing that broad governance structure that should include representatives of all the key stakeholders, which could include the bar, all the legal aid organizations, the tribal organizations, libraries, networks of people who are already active in this space to get that diverse feedback system going on. Identifying who's going to pay for this and making sure that that funding stream is lined up is critical for moving forward. Creating an outreach and marketing plan, thinking through how is this going to be developed? Stakeholders indicated that in rural areas, radio is going to be a key area for marketing. Looking at all the resources that are available now, including the organization's own, all those stakeholders' own organizations, the tribal organizations, really identifying sort of what resources are available that can help spread the word about this, and then planning how that is all going to be fitting together, and creating an evaluation plan to track portal outcomes and success. Down the road, the people who are paying the bill are going to want to know that the portal is effectively meeting the needs that led to their decision to fund the portal. It's going to be important to think through what information is going to be necessary to do that evaluation and to build that information into the portal process. For example, Minnesota has built user experience surveys into their portal. So they're continually tracking not only usage of the site, but what pages people are looking at. And then when they're leaving the site, they get a pop-up survey that asks a series of questions. Did you find what you were looking for? Did you understand the information? Did it help you identify where you should go from here? So building that into the portal process when you're designing it, it's going to make it much easier to track how, what's working and what's not, and where the state should go from here. Next slide. So the key first step we would strongly recommend is to create that steering committee to think through all of these key things. And really, two committees will be needed. First, that governing committee with broad stakeholder membership to guide the overall process, and then a technical work group with people with the skills and the knowledge necessary to really think through the technical part of this site. What software should it use? What specific goals do we have, and how would we operationalize those? How long is this going to take? What should be the deliverables, and what's our plan for that? What do we expect the software developer to be able to give us at specific times, so that when they say, hey guys, we're done, that they actually are done, because otherwise they will find an exit point and say, well, we think that we did everything you want, but you need to be able to be in the position of saying yes or no to that. Ensure the design that the software developer is going to be putting in really will give you everything that you need down the road. And it's within that hosting organization's capacity to do that. That it's lined up not only to be able to push the button and make this work, but also to maintain that and continue moving it forward. So having all of this down is going to be critical to giving you a product that really meets the needs of the state. And that technical work group should report regularly to that governance committee to continue to have that buy-in and to get the feedback. And in most states with a structure like this, they meet quarterly.
I would also just add that one of the things that's made the Ohio site, which is something I know a lot about, um, work really well is that both in setting up their technical committee and the governance committee, they were thoughtful about looking for people with skill sets that would lend themselves to the areas like publicity, technical areas, and so on that we've talked about.
Right. So how much would this cost? Well, that's going to be dependent on a couple of things. One, to what extent can this be built on the existing state portal? Will that software support everything that the new design would deliver? And also, then what content areas do you want to have developed before it starts? It was beyond the scope of our study to really dive into the technical specifications of software, but assuming that the state has to start from scratch, and it may not, but just sort of worst case scenario here, building a site that looks and operates much like Minnesota will cost about what Minnesota paid for that over the last couple of years. And that was around $250,000. Now, with inflation, that probably upper boundary of that would be about 350,000, but that's going to depend on what software development costs are in New Mexico, because that's a little bit different in every state, and to the extent where you can borrow people from other organizations who have some of that skills. So if you go off to hire a national big organization, that's going to cost more. If you can do that with an in-house developer, that would cost less. So that is why thinking through those design specification issues are going to directly affect the bottom line of building the new portal. You also need to think through how much it's going to cost. Minnesota spends between $325,000 and $350,000 to operate the portal, but that is far more than just operating the server. The operating costs there are, yes, I mean, it's operating the server and doing little technical fixes as software changes and things like that. But equally important, that supports about 3 staff who are lawyers who develop new content and go through all of the content at least once a year to see whether it needs to be updated, which they do in consultation with bar committees and things like that. But that is, equally important to keeping the site going is to make sure that the content is what you want, and that as new areas are coming to the front in terms of legal needs, that you have the capacity in-house built in to develop the content necessary to say, oh, we have now we've got an issue on getting qualified for public assistance and building the content area and the website functionalities to deal with that. So worst case scenario, about $350,000 to develop it. If you can build this on top of what you've already got, that would save you a lot of money. But you need to carefully think that through to make sure that site has that capabilities. And about equal amount of money in annual operating costs. We ask everybody that we talk to what would be the best source for funding for this. And the unanimous conclusion was the legislature should fund this as part of the Annual Appropriations Act. Now, the good news is that New Mexico budget is looking much better than it ever has before because of the increased drilling in the eastern part of the state. So we feel that the legislature would be willing to consider this, particularly if you can go to them with this very well thought out business plan for operating the portal. That is key to any funding ask, as you know, and so that is another reason why we would strongly recommend thinking through this before you make that budget request to them. Next slide.
Okay, so there are two key questions. One, who's going to pay for it, and the other is where is it going to be located? This information that's of course in the report, and which I'm going to talk through now, comes from being able to interview all of the stakeholders and being able to examine the documents that we were able to examine. And the nice thing from our standpoint was people would suggest things, and then we would be able to follow up and ask people about those ideas down the road. So it's kind of a dream of a researcher and about how to do this. So let's start with New Mexico Supreme Court Law Library. What are the positive advantages, or what are the advantages? Obviously, the staff have not only technical expertise, but a great interest in gathering and providing updated information about websites. And they were very enthusiastic about the project when we talked to them about that. They currently provide a great deal of legal information to Mexico residents and people who are involved with the bar. And the organization can be funded because the appropriation comes through the state Supreme Court by the legislature through that appropriation. One of the disadvantages is they're currently not running a legal aid portal. So the second suggestion was the New Mexico Bar Association. And as you all know, the bar currently has pretty much connections with everyone associated with legal issues within the state. It represents state lawyers who provide legal aid and pro bono services. You've done things like provide a modest means helpline and other kinds of outreach to look at how the legal information and the legal needs of New Mexico can be served. So that's the positive. The negative is the bar is not directly fundable by state legislature. There need to be some legislation passed to do that. Staff, when we talked to them, said, well, it sounds like a great idea. We don't know that we have the technical expertise to pull that off right now. We would need to develop that expertise, and we would need to know a lot more about this stuff to be able to open a legal aid portal. Some stakeholders outside the bar expressed a concern that the bar has so many competing priorities and projects right now that it might fall by the wayside. It might not be a main focus of the bar. The third suggestion, which was a really interesting one, is the Civil Legal Services Commission. The organization is directly fundable by the state legislature, and of course serves mostly as a pass-through granting agency. Stakeholders indicated the commission's view as a positive, neutral entity. However, the current organizational role is limited to distributing funding. Staff is very small and lacks technical expertise. There's not a current portal sponsored by these folks. And there was some concern that in putting the portal with the Civil Legal Services Commission, it would really be outside their charge and mission from the legislature, and that might lead to some issues. Another place, New Mexico Legal Aid. They currently, of course, operate the Law Help NM legal site. They have a role in hosting information on legal issues. And some people said, well, of course, it needs to be in legal aid when we talk to them. What are the disadvantages? Once again, the organization, unlike the state Supreme Court Law Library and the Civil Legal Service Commission, is not directly fundable by state legislature. Staff report that they are just overwhelmed. They lack the time and technical expertise needed to upgrade the website, keep it updated, keep the translations upgraded, and turn the website into a portal that would have the functionality that people asked for. Some stakeholders said they were concerned that the organization might use the portal to divert referrals from other legal aid entities. And of course, funding for many of you all is dependent upon how many people you serve. And it was seen as a possible conflict of interest. Another suggestion was the New Mexico State Bar Access to Justice Grant Fund Grant Commission. And again, it has the mission of distributing funds to qualifying legal aid organizations. The current funding sources, the IOLTA and the ProHack Vice fees, donated by the attorneys have been found in other places, Ohio in particular, to be problematic in that the funding levels have varied immensely. People are doing more online kind of training. The State Bar Association isn't collecting those fees anymore. And also during the pandemic, the interest on the IOLTA accounts dropped to zero. So I know in the case of Ohio, they were forced to go do some extra fundraising there. And finally, the final organizational option is the New Mexico Supreme Court Access to Justice Commission. There's a mission of providing legal information and advice to stakeholders currently. There's Access to Justice Commission serves as host for legal portals in other states like Ohio. It's a large part of what the Access to Justice Commission in Ohio is doing these days. And it's also seen very positively as by stakeholders as an entity that brings together legal entities and functions within New Mexico without some of the baggage associated with some of the other organizations. Once again, however, the organization is not directly fundable by the state legislature, has a lot of ongoing projects that would compete with portal workload, and the staff report that they lack technical expertise to support and put up such a portal. So having run through those, and of course, there's a lot more detail and a lot more quotes within the report, and I encourage you to read the report. That will end our presentation here with a slide. And I guess at this point, we could open it up to questions.
Questions, anybody? Don?
Friends, just a comment. Your report was extraordinarily good and helpful. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
That's a wonderful thing to hear. Thank you.
I second that, Dan and Gary. This is a very comprehensive report. If anyone who takes their time to read through it will really, I see some people who are nodding who have looked at it. It's very comprehensive. I feel like I have a very good handle on what you found, and I learned a lot about the people in this room, quite frankly, that I didn't know. So you helped bring us together in a way that I have not heard before about challenges and issues that affect a lot of the organizations here, and also just thoughts. It was very helpful on many different levels, not just the portal. So thank you.
And you have a question from Winter Torres on virtual.
Hi, yes, I have a question. Does the budget that you are looking at or that the other courts are using include robust sort of outreach or marketing, including like text messaging or not, the modes of communication that a lot of folks use now?
Yes, it does. And that obviously depends on sort of how it's coordinated. But what most states do is they try to build that from what's already existing in the state. So the Legal Services State Support, which is the group that manages the portal, it puts out social media posts. It's pretty active in that, but it also then works with the bar and all the other organizations. So it's sort of part of a community who's communicating the same information as broadly as they can. But that is part of what they're doing without those resources.
Yeah, and I would also add that there's a wide variety of things that have proven effective in different places. Michael Fullen talks in Change Forces, talks about top down and bottom up at the same time. And so Ohio, Minnesota, Illinois, Michigan, the exemplary portals are spending money on things like the Google's steering of people to the website who are looking things, but they also are doing things like making sure that on the Spanish television channels, in Ohio, for example, that there are ads talking about their legal portal. Also, one of the really important things for Ohio and other places has been just giving court clerks information about the portal to provide people who they come in. Of course, that's a slippery slope, and people don't want to be providing legal advice. But if they have a card, which they do in Ohio and other places, to hand people who come in and say, "Look, here's a portal that can answer a lot of your questions." Before the Ohio portal launched, there was an extensive marketing campaign that involved legal fairs and folks getting on buses and traveling to more rural parts of the state. But to answer your question, when we looked at the cost attendant in this, we did include the sort of PR and outreach component as well.
Yeah,
Okay.
and one thing that a number of the states are doing, and Minnesota's really investing in this now, is to set up what they call kiosks, which is a computer in libraries, in social service organizations that is set up to run that it sort of provides ready access to the portal for people who are in there. And then they can sit down with the community navigators. They don't have to bring their own laptop. They don't have to find somebody else in the organization with a computer that people can sit down on. And that really has helped make this easier to use, particularly for people in rural areas that may not have their own computer, that they can go to the library in places they're already going to, their social service agencies, and have a resource that lets them access the portal.
Juan, I think you had a question.
Yeah, on the exemplary legal websites, when they were initially developing their sites, did they basically depend on external technology firms to do that build up, or were they doing some of that internally?
I can talk about Ohio in particular. They use folks in-house, and they kind of hit the jackpot. A couple of interns that they had hired just for the summer turned out to be kind of website technical whizzes. I will say one of the advantages to doing it in-house, if the budget will agree with that and you can find competent people to do that, is that you have a lot more control. For example, a couple of years ago when the pandemic hit, and by the way, I need to comment that after 3.5 years of avoiding the COVID, I got it last week, so that was a lot of fun. Get your vaccines. They were able to very instantly, within 48 hours, put up information about tenants' rights, information about worker rights, information about that were directly related to the pandemic. Gary, what did Minnesota do?
Minnesota did a couple of things. They used outside developers, but then they've got a couple of people who are contractors who are really working in-house. And they did that for a couple of reasons. One is it was hard for them with their own resources and the state pay schedule and all of that to have in-house people. And they also wanted to make sure that they didn't end up with a situation where we had one person on staff, but they left, and in 6 months, hopefully we'll hire another one. So, I mean, you've got to balance these trade-offs. The key, I think, is making sure you've got access to the resources, whether it's in-house staff or a university or consultants who can get this work done where it needs to get done. And like so many things with this, it's got to be a solution that works for New Mexico.
Dan, you had a question?
Yes. So it was a pleasure to meet with both of you, and I enjoyed that conversation quite a bit. Looking through the report, I see there's a little bit of conversation about private attorneys, and I went to the Minnesota site and did a few different queries, and what I found was that if I don't choose, I need a lawyer at the beginning, I don't have any other off ramps to choose a lawyer. And then when I ran some fairly common scenarios for my area of practice, family law, all of the I need a lawyer as set of questions ended up with, we have no information, we can't refer you to anyone. So I'm just wondering, for me, it's really important that practitioners also remain a part of the access to justice solution, and that not all of the solutions simply be in agencies and other things. So I'm wondering if you know some best practices that states are doing to partner with and incorporate the private attorneys and the bar associations, to make sure that clients for whom lawyers are an appropriate solution are referred to those lawyers, and how are groups like this group, which I'm just a listener, I'm not a regular member, but I'm an annoying attendee. But how do groups like this make sure that lawyers, practitioners, remain part of the solution set, and that not all the solutions are outside of the bar association?
Well, I think that's a perfect example of an issue that supports the idea that this has to work for New Mexico. In Minnesota, you're right, that they haven't built in a lot of private attorney, links in there. But New Mexico is a much bigger state. The bar is heavily involved in that because they've got more resources. So they haven't really tried to build in find a low cost or low bono attorney, but we would agree that is, a consideration that New Mexico needs to think through.
Thank you.
Gary.
Yeah.
Gary, Disability Disability Rights. Yeah, thanks again, guys, for your work and everything. I'm glad you're talking about the sort of marketing and outreach, because I'm interested in that. I mean, because, my experience has been one of the two of the primary barriers to people getting access to legal assistance is not recognizing they have a legal problem. Then secondly, where do they go to? This is helpful in helping people know where to go to, possibly a portal. But I think we'll be missing a significant population unless we also consider how do people recognize they have a legal problem and be directed there from local people who know them, because that's going to be the connector for them to resources. And if we've got a portal that's really generic, that's helpful in that second step, instead of trying to figure out which one of these 15 organizations might help you with that type of legal problem. But I feel like this will be most successful if we make sure that step one is somehow addressed, other than through technology.
Right.
I think we need humans on the ground in the communities to help.
Well, right. And that's why we recommended you building that marketing plan at the beginning, because you can build some things into technology, but as you know, you need to have that human touch. And that's where getting all of the organizations that are currently active in this space, because most people who have a problem are going to go to someone to ask for information. And those people then need to know about the portal and what it can do and be able to point people to it, and then have resources so they can sit down to do it. And that's going to be really important in the rural areas.
And one of the things that needs to be built in is, and Gary was talking about this earlier in terms of evaluation, but it's the feedback loop. There needs to be a sort of ongoing examination of who is being served and to what extent they're being served. And those data need to be, gathered on an ongoing, purposeful basis. It's obvious to anyone who visits the state that Albuquerque has different issues than Las Cruces, has different issues than Gallup, has different issues than Artesia, and so on. But it is useful and possible during the process of putting the portal together to be purposeful about reaching out to community organizations and linking those social services organizations together. That's really the dream of these portals, right? To be a wraparound service provider in terms of legal aid and also providing legal information for people to move on from. And so that can be done, that can be developed. It has to be something that's purposeful. And in constructing a board or two boards, a technical board and a governance board, certainly thought should be given to including those individuals who are key stakeholders and navigators within those communities.
And I think a couple things here. So one, I do think the part of the portal, the concept of it is to help identify whether or not there's a legal issue in the first instance. Like that is truly one of its features or its intended feature. And I'd probably say two, there's no one-stop solution, that this is part of the bigger picture that all of the groups, namely civil legal service providers, whether it's the Modest Means Helpline, namely where we do have groups of humans who will help navigate the larger landscape. You know, there's not just one solution, but I think this could potentially help coordinate and link both civil legal service providers to potential referrals over time, if it's something that becomes successful in its own right. But again, for me at any rate, what seems like one of the biggest limiting factors that we really have to be thinking through is funding. We all know what it's like here in New Mexico. I can tell you right now, I don't want any of the civil legal service providers having anxiety because
We already are.
because Dan and Gara, remember, are sort of reporting back. But I can tell you, at least from my perspective, there will be no recommendation from me to take away IOLTA funding from civil legal service providers to fund the portal. So let's get all that anxiety out of you. Do not worry. We are all very sensitive to the funding issues that you all have worked so very hard, especially in the last year and leading up to that. And so just know there is not going to be we're not going to be seeking to take away your funding to fund a portal, at least not if I have anything to do with it. So just so you know.
Did you go first?
Well, thank you for that.
So, John, can you wait just a second? Is that okay? Go ahead,
I
Sarisha.
appreciate that you all have recommended doing a steering commission of some kind to be able to think through these issues, right, of funding and getting full buy-in from the providers and from all the stakeholders too, before anything gets going. I have a question about just the Minnesota site and a comment that you made earlier about the site being functional for both clients, but also for navigators, folks who are helping clients, right, through the website. And I was just curious in the evaluation of the Minnesota site, did they have like clients, providing evaluations of what the site was like to go through and what was their feedback about it? And was that site really geared towards people who are trying to use services, or was it geared towards people who are trying to help people, use services? And what did that look like?
Yeah, the survey was of the users of the site. And because the question was, did this help them, understand and be equipped to deal with their issues? That evaluation did not, other than talking to the legal aid providers, did not go down to other community providers to get their perspective on it.
Hey.
And thank you for those comments also. I couldn't believe you, but yeah.
I felt the whole anxiety level of the room go up. Sorry.
Yeah, we want to add to service, not take away. I also enjoyed meeting with you. Thank you for coming out. I'm Betty Flesh with Pegasus, and you may recall when we were speaking, and this really, you've already touched on this in terms of what it does and what it doesn't do, but you both were pretty clear with me that the portal has not worked well for children and children's services. So I just wanted to acknowledge that it'll be great for some things, and then part of the planning, everyone involved really acknowledge who it will work for and really which services is not a good match. So thank you for all your work on this.
Yeah, I mean, and that's part of the whole planning process is figuring out what groups can we reasonably serve through this technology versus other means. Yeah.
Yeah, when I talk to people in Ohio, I said, well, what are the problems? What are the problems that the site doesn't work very well for? And the answer from everyone quickly was anything messy involving children. So if there's custody issues, if there's issues involved with divorce, if there if there are issues involved with child abuse, that basically those issues needed to be referred pretty quickly to someone who was not a portal. That it just didn't work very well. Uncontested divorces and rent agreements and lots of big chunk of the business that people do with interacting with legal services, the portal does very well with. But again, with messy things involving children and protecting children's rights, there are significant challenges for everyone who's put up one of these portals, I would say.
John,
Dean, I just wanted to share experience that some of these portals have had trying to reach out to private lawyers. This has to be an automated system. It cannot call on a person to look in a Rolodex file. So a lawyer has to be willing to define her or his legal service area in a way that is specific enough to link someone with a problem to that lawyer. And then the lawyer has to be willing to take the case that's referred, unless there's a conflict. So it's a two-way deal. If there's going to be private referrals, then the lawyers have to reciprocate and be part of a system with standard definitions of practice. And they can be limited by jurisdiction or area, but that's the big stumbling block of including bar lawyers.
And just respond. I hear that, and I believe that. I think that what some of these portals have an opportunity to do is just to sort of connect with how the bar makes referrals. Here are some lawyers who practice in your area, and here's some ways to reach them. But I also think that in these kinds of conversations, we use the word stakeholder, but I'm not always sure that we're partnering with the private bar in a way that treats them like stakeholders, because, what would it mean to have them involved? What would it mean for them to say yes? Could they be on a list for a little while? Could they agree to say yes to calls in this month or this way? I just think fleshing out those issues, and it is more complicated because it's individuals with businesses and families and trying to meet their bills and trying to do all that. But I just think the level of engagement with the private attorneys should be that of an engagement with stakeholders. And as I said the last time I was at this meeting, we can count the number of people here who are practitioners in practice, billing hourly time, and taking pro bono cases that are a diminishment of my litigation hourly rate, right? We can count those versus the number of people who are funded, and we're a tiny sliver of this conversation, but we deliver the vast majority of pro bono services. So all I'm saying really is that as a stakeholder, the private bar should be treated as stakeholders.
Absolutely. And another part of this that makes it even more complicated is a lot of the things that people come to these portals to. I mean, again, this is just talking for people. This comes from talking to people in Ohio that had a portal up for 2 or 3 years. One of the issues with involving private attorneys is, frankly, lots of people who contact a portal don't have the money to pay a private attorney. And the second part is that a lot of the cases are not necessarily things that private attorneys would get involved in, because again, they're kind of low budget kinds of things, or very short file this motion, file this form, and so on. So it is complicated, and I would say that we haven't really seen, Gary, kick me if I'm wrong, people who are killing it at involving private attorneys on with the legal portals, even the exemplary ones.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen anything that really jumped out when we looked at a lot of them, but doesn't mean it's not a good idea.
We're to it.
Bring it. Anyway, it's no question that the private bar are stakeholders, and that I'm all about keeping you involved in this conversation. And whether it's through the portal or otherwise, I'm kind of thinking, what I've been thinking all along is it needs to be at least probably more the otherwise, namely other ways to incorporate potentially pro bono services and getting that information out to the public in a better way. But that's not a conversation that will continue. But Dan, Gary, thank you so much. Oh, and one more question.
Sorry.
Oh, Lisa, go ahead.
My quick question, I might have missed it, is what are the state entities that house the Minnesota and Ohio programs? I'm not sure I heard where they're housed.
The Minnesota portal is housed in what's called Legal Services State Support, which is an entity that coordinates the state's legal aid providers that are funded through state funds.
And in Ohio, it's funded through and contained within the Access to Justice Commission. In fact, I walk out of one office where I'm talking to folks who run the portal. In the next office down the hallway is the woman who's the chair of the Access to Justice Commission. So to say that they have a very close working relationship is kind of understating it, really. And it has become, for the Access to Justice Commission in Ohio, both an incredible success and an incredible responsibility to make sure that the funding continues. They're funded mostly through donations and other kinds of things, especially with, again, the IALTA funds dropping to such a low level. But yeah, that's where the folks in Ohio are housed, for the Access to Justice Commission.
Yeah, and when we looked nationally, they're housed everywhere in different states. Some of them are in the Supreme Court, some of them through Access to Justice. You name it, it's been tried somewhere. There's states that have tried it in the judicial circuit. Florida tried that. It was not successful because they didn't really have a good marketing plan, and it got virtually no use. What is really important, as you well know, is it has to be a placement that makes sense for New Mexico. And those are the considerations that really helped the organization, the states that we looked at that were exemplars, is that they found an organizational placement that just made a lot of sense for their own state's unique circumstances.
Yes, so thank you, Gary and Dan. Again, a very comprehensive report. I think anyone who reads through it, we will understand all of the lengths that you went to give us the best data you could, both within New Mexico and understanding the scene nationally. So we really appreciate it. I don't think we've seen the last of you. You've been very helpful and engaged in this process, and we thank you.
Well, if you have any follow-up questions or anything, don't hesitate to reach out to us.
And I certainly hope that we're able to establish some kind of ongoing relationship, because it's tremendously interesting work, and the state of New Mexico is uniquely propelled in that direction right now, which makes it good for people who are trying to provide those services. So thank you so much for the work, and thank you so much for all the time that you folks gave to us in allowing us to gather the data that we needed.
Erin, before Gary and Dan leave, and again, thank you for everything that you've done, do you want to quickly update the group on communications that you've also been having with the Four Corners group? Because I think it helps to sort of amplify the work that's being done in New Mexico and how it may impact other jurisdictions?
So we have a group, it's called the Four Corners Group. We've got access to justice folks from the Four Corners, and we meet several times a year. And in fact, we're doing a presentation together with all of the heads of the access to justice groups from the Four Corners at the Ohio ABA Equal Access to Justice State Chairs meeting in Ohio, which is a mouthful. And just know that we are really at the forefront of the internet portal of those Four Corner states. I sent them our report. They were incredibly grateful and impressed with that report. And that we're working on gathering data from them to bring that into our group here, because they are doing innovative states in the Four Corners that I think will help inform what we do here. But so more of the stay tuned on that. But it's been a really active and good group, and we'll bring them in for what they're doing in their respective states here, which I think is incredibly helpful.
Judge, I know we need to move on, but I had a few questions, but I can weigh in if, like, will we still have access to them after this, like by email or something? Can I send those by email? Or?
So yes, so I'm sure Gary and Dan will harass you more, I think, after the meeting today. Hopefully you'll give us some window of time to where we can pick your brain a little bit more.
Sure, of course.
Absolutely.
All right, so yes.
Okay. Try not to harass.
Well, we'll let you go for
Unless you
today.
want.
Thank you so much.